Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Sargent. Welcome to my course, 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. We're coming to you today from Sacred Fire Church in Bellevue, Florida. Come on by.
So we're becoming more and more a feeling people rather than a thinking people. And it makes it hard to teach people anything. It makes it hard for you to understand Scripture. If you can't think about Scripture, you just have to feel it. Oh, that's not the way it happened with us, so I just don't know what to do with that. So you just have to, okay, what are their categories? How did it work? What were the rules? What were the expectations? How does this thing that I'm looking at fit the pattern or break the pattern? Let's read a little bit from the Wikipedia because I think it's going to help us do this. Concubinage is an interpersonal relationship in which a person engages in an ongoing relationship, usually matrimonially and sexually oriented, with another person to whom they are not or cannot be married. The inability to marry may be due to differences in social rank, including slave status, or because the man is already married. Historically, the relationship involved a man in a higher social status, who usually has a legally sanctioned wife and maintains a second household with a lesser wife. The woman in such a relationship is referred to as a concubine. Remember, we're dealing with an English word. So historically, concubinage was frequently voluntary by the woman or her family's arrangement, as it provided a measure of economic security for the woman involved. Under Roman law, Roman culture under the empire came to tolerate concubinage as long as the relationship was durable and exclusive. For Roman jurists, concubinage was an honorable de facto situation. Paul Vaney, this all comes from the book Paul Vaney, The Household and Freed Slaves. Okay, now that's Roman, right? So what are we dealing with? Concerning the concubine's legal status or the legal definition of her status in ancient China, for example, concubinage was akin, although inferior, to marriage. The children of a concubine were recognized as legal offspring of the father. However, their inheritance right might have been inferior to younger children of a marriage, or they may have received a smaller inheritance. Men frequently used concubines to bear heirs when they were not able to produce sons with their wives. Among the Israelites, men commonly acknowledged their concubines, and such women enjoyed the same rights in the house as legitimate wives. I don't like the category of legitimate. It is a type of wife, but there is a ranking. The principal difference in the Bible between a wife and a concubine is that wives had dowries, while concubines did not. Because it was regarded as the highest blessing to have many children, legitimate wives, or we're talking about wives with dowries, often gave their maids to their husbands to atone, at least in part, if they were barren, as in the case of Sarah, Hagar, and Rachel and Bilhah. The children of the concubine had equal rights with those of the legitimate wife. For example, King Abimelech was the son of Gideon and his concubine. All right. In Judaism, according to the Babylonian Talmud, the difference between a concubine and a full wife was that the latter received a marriage contract and her marriage was preceded by a formal betrothal. Neither was the case for a concubine. One opinion in the Jerusalem Talmud argues that the concubine should also receive a marriage contract, but without a clause specifying a divorce settlement. Does that make sense? So in Israel, it's different than China, it's different than Rome, it's different than Russia, it's different than South America, but we've chosen the English word concubinage in order to recognize some kind of a difference in the status. It's our English word versus a different paradigm in every nation. All right. It falls out of favor with the rabbis after the Christian era, when Gnosticism influences both Judaism and Christianity with asceticism. All right, that's a whole other conversation we'll have for another day. All right, so what is a concubine? The Hebrew word is pilegesh. All right? Hebrews were responsible for their sex. Wantonness in all forms was a violation of Torah. You get these people who they're trying to take Scripture and they're trying to just squeeze it for this or squeeze it for that. Let's look at the big picture. Like those people who say, well, I think this text here, if you interpret it that way and turn it this way, close one eye and wait for the east wind to blow, you can see that it says that God loves abortion. Let's take the big picture of Scripture. The God who loves life, who cherishes life, who knew us in our mother's wombs. John the Baptist, hearing the words of Mary, leapt because of the Son of God in her womb. And you think God celebrates us killing our children? God, who favors marriage, who made a man for a woman to build a home, to love their children, who established profound rules around human sexual behavior in order to create in the family a bubble of non-sex. Family was the place that you could exist safely without sexual pressure on you, as opposed to in civilizations where, so there's this tribe in Africa that when you turn 18, you have to spend the year naked. And the elders and the people of power in the community randomly just grab people, men and women, and use them sexually. And it's considered indecent to resist them. That's kind of sick behavior. The Bible tries to create the family as a place of safety. You have time to develop as a human being without having your body used for someone else's unfettered sexual desires. And you think God favors fornication? You think God winks at divorce? Divorce and infidelity? And you think, hey, this is what progressive Christians are telling us. God just loves us and wants us to be our best self, and to confine ourselves sexually is so hard. So God weeps a tear for us and says, don't worry about it. I won't hold you accountable for your behavior. There is nothing in Scripture from Genesis to Revelation that hints at any such thing. It is an abomination for those people who tell us in the name of Jesus that it's okay to fornicate, that it's okay to be homosexual, that it's okay to divorce or have affairs, or, nonsense. But there was also a time in a very hard and difficult world where women were seriously disadvantaged by the sheer difficulty. We've talked about the Indian, when I was in India, and I saw the people with the straps around their waists and chests getting pulled through the dirt by a massive cow, or holding a stick in the ground. Women couldn't do that. Women couldn't lift up the timbers that were needed to build the houses or carry the stones, and they were dependent on the strength of men and the endurance of men to bring food from the earth, to hunt the wild animals. It's not that they could never hunt or never do anything like that. They could, and they had lots of skills, but everybody in the family brought their skills to the table and did what was best in order to create this kind of we're a unit. We're together. We're all looking out for one another. And for these progressive Christians to come and say, oh yeah, all these little rules, God doesn't care about any of that. He just wants you to be happy. And be happy means satisfy every single ugly ook that sticks in my gut and goes, I want. We really think that the highest law of Torah is I want? It is not. And so Hebrews were held accountable and responsible for what they did. God recognized that they would at times, because they are rebellious human beings, that they would rebel and that they would act badly. And the laws are written for that. So he permits divorce because of the hardness of their hearts, Jesus says. Because there's more than one way to get rid of a woman you're determined to get rid of. So he permits polygamy, very carefully restrained by law, for the good of women, not for the stoking of or meeting of wanton desires of men. It's not what it's about. It's about, I am a man of means, and as a man of means, we have all these people out there that have no one to care for them. I am responsible to bring people under my roof, to bring people into my house. Because I am a man of means, I can sustain many people. And in a world where you think, like right now, the differences between men and women are like 1%. I think, wait a minute. So there's 3 million more women in America than men, out of 350 million. There's 3 million more women. In their society, with war, violence, the men were the women radically outnumbered the men. So you have all these women who need caring and need protection. So I had a student of mine that was actually from Uganda, and she talked about, after the Ugandan war with Idi Amin, is that you had so many widows and so many women that had no husbands and no hope of getting husbands. They went to the church and asked for polygamy. So we have the story in the Bible. It says 7 women will take a hold of one man and say, give me children, call me by name, I'll work hard for my own keep. I'll do everything I can to take care of myself, but bring me and let's be a bigger family. And so God permits polygamy for the sake of women so that they can find protection. But God's ideal, one man, one woman, for life, exclusive, lifelong oneness. That's his ideal. At times, as he said, he permits divorce for the sake of women. He permits polygamy for the sake of women. Right? But it's not his ideal, never has been his ideal. But in every single element, we do not want to mistake the idea of polygamy for wantonness. The Hebrew scriptures are against sexual wantonness. They look at you, man and woman, and say, constrain yourself to this lifelong exclusive commitment. Now, that lifelong exclusive commitment, he might have that kind of a relationship with, in the scriptural period, with several, because a man of means was actually expected to have it. We're going to have to deal with this story in the book of Daniel that is actually the myth of the world tree. And you see it in the book of Daniel when King Nebuchadnezzar is boasting over himself. And he has the dream where he's a giant tree, and his branches spread out, and the birds of the air live in the tree, and food falls, and it feeds the nations, and it feeds the animals, and all of nature is protected by this tree and fed by this tree, and that's what he is. And so there's an element in which men of means, men of skill, who had the ability to be like that tree, that they bring as many people underneath it to be filled and full and cared for. And one of the biggest ways of caring for a woman was to give her the opportunity to bear sons. A husband might divorce you, but a son will always take care of mama. Unless you give birth to a total rotten piece of garbage. But on the whole, sons will take care of mama. So to deny a woman marriage and to deny her a son is to sentence her to poverty and death. To make way for a woman to have a child, even if it sometimes steps a little outside our normal parameters for marriage, was a blessing and a gift to women. So, but at no point was sexual wantonness tolerated in any way. Men didn't have multiple wives because they just wanted to be a cad and a wanderabout. That was absolutely forbidden. You took responsibility. You brought them into your house, and you had certain rules. You bring a new wife in, you have to meet certain standards to be able to do it. All right, concubines in Israel were wives without inheritance rights, women without means, prospects, or connections could find security as concubines. All right. Some slaves became concubines, but that moved them away from the slave caste to being a concubine. All right. Oh, so they're lesser wives who fell under the authority of full wives. You got to organize the home, and how are you going to rank it? Full wives were the boss. And by the way, there is not a single story in all of Scripture in which polygamy produced anything but tension and disharmony in the home. Not one single story. There's no story. In other words, it really tells us in Scripture, this is not God's ideal. But there are times where he has permitted certain things for the sake of the suffering of women, to help them. Okay, homes had expected structures. There were standards for polygamous situations. There were rules for husbands and rules for wives and rules for concubines. That means common patterns. In Hammurabi, where we talked about if a concubine got too uppity against the primary wife, they could be beaten or even stripped and forcibly divorced and sent back to slavery. The children of both generally were to receive equal legal regard. Now, this is in Hammurabi. This means the pagans, some of the pagan kingdoms around Israel. All right, now, we've got to put the whole story under hospitality rights. This is how things are supposed to go. All right, so I'm traveling to India one year, and we have met a gentleman in America. I think we talked about his wife was throwing food at us, slopping it on the thing in front of us, splashing it onto us, cursing us in English so we could hear her. Well, that entire scenario, like a scenario that's so bad, the whole trip was just one bad thing after another. But it started with something bad that I didn't recognize. But the bishop who I was traveling with did recognize. And that is we showed up at the airport, and they weren't there to greet us. And when John called to ask where they were, they said, oh, just get a taxi. And the bishop says to me, very quietly, because he doesn't want to hurt John's feelings, this is a very bad sign. I said, really? He goes, it is unthinkable not to greet your guest at the gate when they're coming. He goes, this is not going to be a good weekend. And I thought, oh, come on. He's being that's a little overboard, don't you think? No. No. Just like when we did the wells and we said what was the first sign that Saul was in trouble? Was his failed well scene. Not the first time he did something that was openly regarded as a sin, but the first time that a paradigm that should have gone one way twisted and went another way, that was the first sign that Saul was trouble. And in that trip, he said, this is not going to be a good weekend. And it went from bad to worse. Believe it or not, her throwing food on our plates and muttering, stupid Americans come here to rob me, was not the low point of the weekend.
What?
Oh, it was much worse.
Oh, my.
Sometime I'm sure the stories will bleed out because every once in a while something will just remind me of it. All right. So we have to remember, there are rules for hospitality. You have to know what they are. All right. We talked last week about Lot's daughters and the rules of hospitality, how the family was to bring a man in and the family was to protect who came under their roof and fed from their table. This was not a man versus woman thing. It was everybody in the family doing their part. And that even if he meant it, which he did not mean it, but even if he did, it would be better for them to receive this type of indignity than for him to choose other opportunities, like giving himself over to homosexuality, which would have been considered even greater sin, or to give his wife over for adultery, which would have been an even greater sin. But that's not even what's going on. He is keeping hospitality rights properly. All right. Never. It's like warning, warning, warning. Danger, Will Robinson, danger, right? We never want to underestimate the importance of hospitality rights, ever. This is huge. We talked about it last time. This is like mammothly huge because it involves the holy, okay? A child being subjected to indignities of sexual abuse, not a child, but a young woman of marriageable age, to lose her virginity in a disgraceful way is terrible. But to violate the holy, you don't violate the holy. And the sacred rights are sacred rights. You just don't. And so we marry, and our marriages are sacred rights. And it worked to them too, sacred rights. All right, so you're literally having to pick a terrible situation and a terrible choice among terrible situations if you were to go for the little one. But again, remember, he's not actually offering his daughters. So if you haven't seen that one, go back and watch it. It's one of the most important sacred duties in the ancient Near East. It is commanded directly 6 times in the New Testament and is paraded before us without the name. It's just paraded before us dozens of times in Scripture. This is a very important thing. It shows up in all ancient literature. It's the reason for the flood in some of the Greek stories. The violation of guest-host relationships. It is super serious. Everything that involves the divine is super serious. The eating of the meal makes this bond. I'm not going to take a lot of time with this particular quote here, but just throughout the ancient world, the eating of the meal made a sacred bond. That's where the sacred bond of guest-host starts. You come into my house, you eat from my table, but now remember the weird offer that he gives. We'll take care of ourselves. We won't eat from your table. We won't, you don't have to offer us any kind of that normal stuff right here. Not good. Every single thing that happens in this story, every exchange is bad, worse, 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 worse. Right from the beginning. All right. So we remember that the eating of a meal from someone's table was a 3-way sacrifice participation. You and I ate before God, and we were made one before it in a bond that God will hold each of us accountable to honor. It's the covenant's earliest form. That which is in you is in me, and we are united by it. We're made one because we eat the same thing. When Paul gives communion and says, one loaf, they pass through the cloud. One, they're together. They're all participate. They're all united through this event, through this participation in this thing. All right, so the great virtue, hospitality is the great virtue of the ancient world. It's connected to holiness, covenant, sacred bond, and everything that deals with that is important. All right, now, the bigwig thing is to compare this story to the story of Lot. All right. So the offering of Lot's daughters in Genesis 19 is intentionally paradigmatic for understanding Judges 19. The author of Judges wrote his story to connect with that story. Remember, so the similarities tell you that you need one to be the lens for the other. The differences are the message. That's where you're getting the real messages. So in everything you compare, like if you take the Israelites in the ancient world, there are many things that the Israelites do that compare to what the pagans did. But it's not the similarities that are this message. The similarities tell you that they shared a general view of the world. It's the differences that tell you the real substance of their lives. And so this is a very big deal in academics, where they try and say, well, this is similar to what happened among the pagans, so Israel must be pagan. Oh, no, 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 no. The similarities tell you that they shared a culture. The differences tell you the real substance of their theology. So it's always in the differences. And the very fact that I said that would send a lot of ancient Near Eastern scholars head spinning, because they have, for no reason at all, simply decided to go the other way. So I say the points of similarity bind the stories together. The points of distinction contain the message. So we have acts of hospitality from the concubine's father. How does that go? All right. Now, contrary to Abraham and Lot, this is what we're going to call it. Contrary to Abraham and Lot. Genesis 18:5. I will fetch a morsel of bread and comfort you your hearts. After that you shall pass on. For therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, so do as thou hast said. Now Genesis 19. All right, this is Lot. And he said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early and go on your way. What happens in our story?
He keeps him.
He keeps him and keeps manipulating him and dragging him down and keeping him and keeping him and keeping him. And it leads to trouble. It is because he keeps him so long on their final day, manipulating him into not getting an early start, that they are forced to take shelter in a city rather than making it all the way home. The father-in-law started this by being a bad host. Not bad host ungenerous, a bad host in being manipulative and dragging him on. When you see story after story in which part of the promise is, I'll feed you early and you can get on your way. And now all of a sudden you've got a story that, oh, I promise that I'll feed you early and you get on your way, but when you go to do it, I'm not going to let you. And eventually I'm going to keep you so long that you make a very foolish choice in order to escape my clutches. And by doing so, I get my daughter killed. So in those days when there was no king in Israel, a certain Levite was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her, to speak kindly to her and bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple donkeys, and she brought him to her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. Not an unkind man, but he's going to cause trouble. His father-in-law, the girl's father, made him stay, and he remained with him 3 days. So they ate and drank and spent the night there. And on the 4th day they arose early in the morning, and he prepared to go. But the girl's father said to his son-in-law, strengthen your heart with a morsel of fed, and after that you may go. So the two of them sat, and they ate, and they drank together. And the girl's father said to him, be pleased to spend the night, and let your heart be merry. And when the man rose up to go, his father-in-law pressed him, till he spent the night there again. And on the 5th day he arose early in the morning to depart, and the girl's father said, strengthen your heart, and wait until the day declines. So they ate, both of them. Behold, the day draws close. Lodge here, and then let your heart be merry. And tomorrow you shall rise early in the morning for your journey and go home. But the man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed, and arrived opposite Jebus, that is Jerusalem. Sun's going down. They're in a dangerous place. It's really dark out there. Right? If the moon's not out, oh boy. All right. So we have a shaming contrast set up when the Levite refuses to seek hospitality among the pagans. So remember, we're setting up irony. And part of irony is when things turn out to be the opposite of the way you expected. He would have probably been safe among the pagans. But he is insisting on going to be with the people of God. And they prove worse. They're worse than the people of Lot. Now, the men don't prove to be worse, but the host does. The person who takes them into his house is not going to protect them. All right, so we set up that, right? You're setting it up. When they were near Jebus, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to the master, come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it. And his master said to him, we will not turn aside to the city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel, but we will pass on to Gibeah. And he said to his young man, "Come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night at Gibeah or Ramah." All right, now, remember what Paul says to the Corinthians. I hear that there's a kind of immorality in the church that even the pagans around you are embarrassed by. That's pretty bad.
That's very bad.
When you've got the most immoral people, and even they are shocked at how bad you are, you're pretty bad. All right. Now, like the angels, the Levite enters into the public square. All right, everybody passes through here, coming and going. All right. Yet no one offers them hospitality, just the same. So they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. They turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house. I guess no one's taking us in. We're going to go sit at the square, right in the center here.
So that was common, where they would just show up at the square and someone would invite. So that was common when somebody would just show up at the square and they'd get invited.
Yes.
That was
So you're expecting, as a visitor's coming, someone comes out to see you. Oh, right?
Okay.
But nobody does, so you make it all the way to the square, and you'll sit there and you'll wait for someone to see you. You know, maybe they're coming in from the fields and the workers are out, and a wife's not going to bring you in, but a husband will see you and bring your whole family, and it's considered one of the highest virtues to be a generous and good host, to protect people that come your way. The host, like Lot, is a sojourner in the region. He comes from the Levite's home region. Oh, this is a perfect setup. Not only am I now among my own Israelite people, but I have met a man who comes from my hometown.
Shazam.
Do you remember Sam's Bar and Grill? Didn't they have great fries? Oh, I love their fries, but that was nothing like their chicken. Oh, their chicken was so awesome. All right. So the angels insist on staying in the square. The Levite seems taken aback that no offer of hospitality has been forthcoming. So the angels already know what's going on. This guy's kind of like, well, this ain't what I expected. I came here because I expected this is where I'll find hospitality. Among those pagans, who knows what I get. Now the Levite offers to take all of his own needs. Interesting. This is not something angels don't do. None of them do. To offer to take care of your own needs. Now, was that common? To offer to not be a burden? Is it so? Sometimes you have this thing where you offer something. So a friend of mine from Pakistan, I asked him, I said, what was one of the most surprising things that you learned about being in America? He goes, growing up, when you went to a person's house, they offered you something to eat or drink, and you'd say, no, 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 no. They would offer a second time. You go, no, 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 no. They would offer a third time, and you'd say, well, okay, maybe just a bite, and maybe you eat everything. Right. He goes, I come to America, and they'd say, would you like such and such? And I'd go, no, 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 no. And they'd never ask me again.
Say, okay.
And I thought, how rude. You're so rude. Right. So it's just like, and he said, I just had to learn that if you want something, Americans are direct communicators. They're not playing a game. They don't know that the game's supposed to be played. You know, it's like when you go into a shop and you say, oh, how much is this? Oh, 20 shekels. You kidding me? You out of your mind? Oh, no, no, no. I will give you 5 shekels. 5 shekels. You rob from my children. You steal from the food from the mouths of my babies. 8 shekels. Okay. Right. And it's the game. You understand? Nobody gets their feelings hurt. It's the way it's played. But he's really taken aback here. This isn't how it's supposed to go. But and then he's offering to take care of himself. I don't see this in the other. But the other times that you have this situation arising, they're angels, and they have nothing, and they don't need anything. So is it customary to offer to care for yourself? Hard to say, but it is definitely a difference in the story. But the man does not accept his offer. The man says, so it's all promise. Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's not a problem. Come to my house. You know, you guys ate a lot. You ate a lot. You know, and all of a sudden you start... What's the nature of the game? You say it's free, but then you ask for money for it. You know, you offer, but then you retract the offer. This is coming off very differently than what we have in the other stories. The host's offer is underwhelming, but he does provide goods for the team's need. Okay, have you noticed something that's missing here when the old man comes and talks to him? What does Abraham do, and what does Lot do? They bow, and what's the language? Oh, my lords, please, please, come into your house, your servant's house. Oh, I am nothing. Please, wipe your feet on the shirt that's on my back so that you may not be uncomfortable for 2 seconds. What am I? I am nothing. Right? You don't have that going on here.
Mm-mm.
All right? It's the Levite and not the host that falls to using servant language. It should be the host that's using servant language. I am your servant. Oh, lords, please. That's not how it goes. And the host does not bow to him. No bowing. Okay, well, we don't bow, so we don't miss it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but they bow. And there's no bowing. There should be. Something's off. Okay. We have the washing, the eating of a meal, which is the making of the covenant. Behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah. The men of the place were Benjamites. He lifted up his eyes, and he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, Where are you going? And where do you come from? And he said to him, We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to the house of the Lord, but no one has taken me to his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine from me and your female servants, and the young man with your servants. There is no lack of anything. The old man said, Peace be to you. I will care for your wants, only do not spend the night in a square. Now we would say, Oh, that is very nice. Isn't that sweet?
Mm-hmm.
An ancient Near Eastern person would say, that's not good. I didn't think anything when they didn't come to pick us up at the airport.
Mm-hmm.
But my host, or the bishop we were traveling with, he went, Ooh, this is not boding well. This is not going to be a good weekend. I thought, he's so judgmental. But he was square on every minute. All right, so what's lacking? Oh, my lords, I am your servant.
Mm-hmm. Some major hospitality.
Bowing,
That's
not going on here.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very flat exchange.
If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below, and don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can, and tell your friends to watch. Thank you.
So he brought him into his house and gave the donkeys feed, and they washed their feet, and they ate and drank. Covenant. All right, the men of Benjamin gather at the door like the men of Sodom do, making the same demands in strikingly similar phraseology. This is not just an accident. Well, maybe that's just what they said. It just happened to be the same thing. Oh, yeah, maybe. But I can guarantee you there's some variety here that we're not actually getting. Most of the changes that are going to take into language are simply the dynamics of talking about a group. Talking about a single man that they want instead of a couple of men. That's the only difference. And they were making their hearts merry, drinking a lot. They're in the house. Behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows surrounding the house, beating on the door. They said to the old man, the master of the house, Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him. Genesis 19:5, and they called to Lot. Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out, that we may know them. So the author is letting you know.
Mm-hmm.
Similar situation right here. The host chastises the men in similar terms to Lot. All right, there's no mention of a shut door. But he does go out to talk to these men, and the men are inside. They're not coming out. We got to understand here, it is very unlikely that this guest followed this man out. Now, in our homes, it wouldn't matter because they're sitting in the living room and our front doors are at the living room most of the time, right? So are we thinking maybe he's sitting at the kitchen table? Are we thinking that he's not aware of what's happening at his front door? Let's look at how the houses are shaped, and that'll tell us something. All right, so Judges 19:23, and the man and the master of the house went out to them and said, No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. Notice what he doesn't mention. What isn't mentioned here? This man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. I beg you, my brothers, in Genesis, do not act so wickedly. Do nothing to these men, for they have come under my shelter of my roof. So the host chastises the men in similar terms to Lot. There's no mention of a shut door, but when we look at the structure of the homes, we're gonna see that this guy is not sitting around like we have doors that open up to our living rooms, doors that open up to our open thing with our kitchens and all that kind of stuff. Their house structure is very different. There is a likelihood that this man has no idea what's going on. All right. Judges 19:23. The master of the house, went out to them and said, No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly, since this man has come into my house. Do not do this vile thing. In Genesis 19:7, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. All right, so the host makes a similar offer of protection for the man, but includes a guest in his offer. So, take my virgin daughter and this guy's concubine. Oh, wow. We just went off the we just went, right? He's now taking one of the guests in his house and offering her to throw her like a piece of meat to quell the appetites of the ravening horde at his door. He's offered his daughter. This is very important. Remember we said in Lot, I didn't think it was a legitimate offer? He offers his daughter. Is he going to give them his daughter? He is not. He offers his daughter and throws in the option of the man's concubine, which is twisted. But he means it just like Lot did. Like, he doesn't mean the offer of his daughter just like Lot didn't. Because he does not give his daughter. All right, so the offer of two women forms a parallel with Genesis 19:8. Behold, now I have two daughters which have not known a man. And now we don't know where the servants are. At this time, the servants have done their duty. They're foils in the story. They're maybe isolated, maybe off in a barn area or another area. Maybe they're on the roof of the house. We're going to look. The roofs were used for a lot of stuff. They would not have the servants sleeping with the women, and the women would not be sleeping in the house with the man, with the guest man. The men would be sleeping in the house. The women would be sleeping in the courtyard, and the servants would most likely be sleeping somewhere else. The animals would also be in the courtyard. But the women would be exactly where the women are supposed to be, which is they'd spend the night in the courtyard, sleeping out there. Because you would not take a man into your home and then bring your wife to there. You would keep the women over there,
sure.
Men are over here, servants are over there. The servants aren't sleeping with the women. The servants are somewhere else. They maybe are on the roof of the house, but maybe they're in another place where they keep the animals. But the animals were often in the courtyard. All right, just remember, this is a very different story. We don't know where the servants are. They're not part of the story. But they're not going to be with the women, I'll tell you that. All right, they're going to be more so among the animals, the donkeys and whatnot. So behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them and do to them whatever seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing. Genesis 19:8. Behold, I have two daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Just as it's not a real offer for this guy because he's not going to give up his daughter, even though he promises it. Same, it was not an actual offer for Lot. All right, this is when the situation goes really off the tracks. All right, the men would not listen to him, so the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. It is very hard as an English reader to get your head around the fact that we don't necessarily know who did what. But I can promise you from the scenario, so the man, the host, the homeowner, seized his concubine, his guest's concubine. No, we're like, well, why? He didn't say his guest concubine, he said his concubine. Now, according to the rules of pronouns, that pronoun should reference the most recent noun that matches it. Yeah, in English. Hebrew does not have any such requirement. So he throws her out till they knew her and abused her all night until morning. As the dawn began to break, they let her go. So the big question comes in, who forced the Levite's concubine out the door?
The host?
I believe it's the host. But we at least have to look at it and analyze it. I didn't come to this conclusion, because I just assumed with everybody else. Remember, I said every one of these 101s is something that I did not interpret properly. Then I discovered that I was wrong, and I had to adjust myself. So we can call it 101 of the most misunderstood verses, or 101 of my biggest blunders as a scholar. All right. So who forced the Levite's concubine out the door? Now the answer changes the nature of the message. Are we in a story about the tribe of Benjamin's wickedness? Are we in a story about how bad it all was everywhere? Is this a story about failed hospitality? Is this a story about how horrible men are to women, generally? Is the Levite a victim or a villain? It really depends on how we construct the antecedents for his concubine. We know who the his is in his concubine, but who's the man? What's the antecedent of the man? The answer changes the way we read the next paragraph. Are the husband's actions normal or obscene? Get up. Let's get going. You just threw your wife to be sexually abused all night and you kick her and say, let's go? Does he know what happened? Is she not where she's supposed to be? Does he have any comprehension of what's going on around him? Was this a sort of a payback for her zana, her in the opening verses, her unfaithfulness? Now remember, we don't know if the unfaithfulness was she cheated on him and ran away, or she ran away because she cheated on him, or whether she cheated on him by running away. Like she was unfaithful to the marriage vow by taking off on him instead of being in the home with him. All right. Does he know that she's hurt? Is he taken by surprise by the whole affair? Is this the biggest shock of his life? The biggest moment in which the woman you just traveled, longed for, wooed, loved,
think
cared
so.
about, brought home, and then you find her dead
No.
when you expected to find her alive?
Mm.
Or were you the perpetrator from the beginning who cared so little about her that you threw her to a ravening crowd to save yourself? Two radically different stories.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So our interpretation is often an emotionally charged wrangling based on how the details provoke our imaginations. All right. This story is horrible. It's terrible. But it's often our modern prejudices that cause us to interpret the horror in a different way. It's a different kind of horror in our minds than it perhaps was to the beginning of the story. Every detail matters, so we have to ask about every single detail. We have to peep intentionally into their feelings and into their culture. Okay. As morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house, where her master was. Again, he's just called the man. Until it was light. And her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go on his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house, with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, now, is this where he expects to find her?
Mm-mm.
Well, it's the question.
Maybe.
Because where are the women staying?
Yeah.
There's a guest in the house. Where are the women going to be? I'll tell you what, you're going to separate the women from the men.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like today, where we all sit around playing cards. My wife, my friend and his wife, another friend and his wife, and we're all playing cards together. No. It's more like the olden days, where you maybe came together to have a dinner, and then the women went to the women's lounge, and the men went to the men's lounge. The men played billiards and smoked cigars and drank whiskey, and the women had wine and finger cakes.
Mm-hmm.
It's more that kind of a world. The women are out there, the servants are over there with the animals, or just wherever, on the roof of the house or whatever, and the men are over there. It's a big separate. Okay. All right. But he said to her, get up, let's get going. I think she's exactly where he expects her to be. The women are sleeping in the courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
And the courtyard is part of the house. Go on.
Okay.
You haven't seen the house yet, so...
No, but this had to be a big commotion. Whenever those men came and were wanting what they wanted.
Right. And the household, the guest is in the house,
Yes.
far away from the commotion, you'll see, and he's drunk.
So he really,
Where do you see the house?
all right.
That's the big thing. Because if we imagine our houses, we imagine something very different. If this kind of thing happened at our front door,
Oh, yeah, you
nobody
know.
in the house is missing it.
Right.
But that's not how their houses are constructed. It's a very different. It's
All right.
a very
I'm
different kind of.
listening.
Right. Right. That's what I mean. It's really hard for us to get our imagination around it. I couldn't even imagine this until I saw and understood how their houses were built, and I went, "Oh, I get it. Oh, all right. This makes a whole lot more sense to me." All right.
What kind of meaning does her hand on the threshold have?
Ooh, we're going to talk about that.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Could we go a
That's
few minutes? Are we good?
Yeah, sure.
I know because we've had some lags here. All right, so two elements tend to mislead us in the way we imagine the story. We assume things about the antecedents, like we have our pronoun rules. Well, that pronoun has to reference this person because that's how we would do it, only that's not how they use pronouns.
Mm.
And then we know little of the setting, all right, the way that homes were generally constructed, and they were pretty consistent. Most of the homes I saw were pretty consistent, unless it was a palace. They all pretty much looked the same, and they had a very similar structure. So, okay, so we stayed in our compound in India. You had the house, right? And the house had a giant foyer in it.
Mm.
So you had the main door of the house, then you had a giant foyer, and then you went out of the foyer and there was a courtyard. And the main gate of the courtyard was over there. You could have had a war at the front gate. If I was in my room, I'd
You
never
would
hear
have
it.
heard
Never hear it. Because my room was in a very different place. Now, these places are really more tight. All right, so it says, so the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. Many commentators assume that the husband and not the host cast out the concubine, and I think they're wrong. I don't think we have the household owner, the host, out there arguing with the crowd, and the drunken husband comes out, yeah, you're bothering me. I can take care of this situation. Grabs his woman by the hair, pulls the gate open, throws her out, shuts the door, and goes, finally, I can get some peace and quiet around here. So that the host is like, I can't believe you just threw your woman out there. No, I don't really see that as happening.
No, not after he traveled miles and miles to go back and pick her and
Right,
get her.
he's gone to great deal of trouble to bring her back. Does he care nothing for her? No, he loves her very much. He tries to woo her, in spite of the fact that she took off on him and possibly cheated on him. So they envision the scene. The host is standing at the door making his offer. And unlike the angels who pulled Lot in, the husband steps up and throws his concubine out. Right? So are we looking at the exact opposite? So the guest, rather than pulling the host back into safety, opens up the door, pushes the host aside, and throws his woman out. That's how they envision it. She's just a concubine, so who cares what happened to her? I don't believe that sets up the story up at all. I think the story's set up for him to really care about her. But does this picture fit the details? Does it fit our pronouns? The coldness of an action seems to contradict his willingness to forgive and his desire to woo, and the extreme efforts that he's gone to go and get her. He spent quite a bit of money traveling with donkeys and servants and food for the road and stepping away from the work that he should be doing and the income loss for the time that he's out while he goes and tries to get her to fix his marriage. He cares for her. He loves her. Judges 19:3. Her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back. All right. Now, what we got to pay attention to is what are the words that are being used in the story for the guest and for the host. So, words that are used for the guest. A certain Levite. All right. He's called him. He's called her husband. He's called son-in-law. He's called the man. He's called his master, the traveler. He's called a him. Right. He's the man who came to your house. This man. Right. He's called, behold, here are my daughter, virgin, and his concubine. So he's a his in that. But against this man, right? So do not sin against this man. Right? Now, do we also add to this, so the man seized his concubine? Is he the man? Here. I don't think so. But anyway, maybe. But we'll put a question mark. I don't think he is. Where her master was. Because remember, she came to the house, the man's house, the place where her master was. And then her master rose. Okay. Now here's the words that are used for the host. An old man, the man, he, the old man, he, the old man, the master of the house, the man, the master of the house. Is he the man who sees? So the man seized. He's already been called the man, right? Twice. No, once he's been called the man, all right? Often the old man. And then in 23 he's called the man again. And then master of the house. So he's called the man several times. All right. So is he the man who seized that man's concubine and threw her out? Right. She fell down at the door of the man's house. So he's called the man again. Here in the possessive, the man's house. So we recognize that when you simply say, the man seized his concubine, that man could be the guest. That man could be the host. But how does the situation lay out for us to get a better guess at it? So let's try. I honestly think that I think we make a mistake by at least not even entertaining the possibility that what we have here is not the husband that threw her out, but the host. That this is hyper host failure here. Perhaps a mental picture of the scene would help. Like let's get a picture of the scene. There are various types of dwellings and neighborhoods. Right? There are various types. If let's say I talked about a city. Right, and I started mentioning words to you like a ranch, a Victorian, a double wide, brownstone, apartment complex, tenement building, skyscraper. Instantaneously, you know exactly what they are. You know the rules. You know where you're likely going to find them. You know exactly what they're going to look like. Right. What about trailer park, farmhouse, split level? Yeah, we know them all. We got tons of them. And we know them. And we know what to expect. I can tell by looking at a house pretty much what's going to happen on the layout of that house by looking at it from the outside. So my wife and I have been watching Mork and Mindy. And it drives me bananas that her apartment is impossible with the house that they show from the outside. I know it's not that same house. And it drives me bananas. You didn't even try. You didn't even try. Goodness gracious, what's the matter with you people? Put a little effort in, will you? All right.
Nanny.
All right. They had very few options. When you're this type of world, they don't have the kind of variety that we have. Okay, so let's take this. Use an example from India. So our school and everything was set in a new neighborhood. When we bought it, it was all empty land. Everything. There was no town there. And we bought the land in order to build it on. But as we did, all the buildings around it started buying up, and they're putting brand new roads. Now, in the old cities of India, the roads were built for carts and horses. Now they have cars. So you'd think if you're building a new city that you would make roads that were
Wider.
satisfying the ability of two cars to pass each other. You would be mistaken. It is a brand new city. They can do anything they want, and they make their roads the same stupid, impossible to pass roads. You cannot cross two cars. One, and of course, every road is a two-way road, though it's only wide enough for one car. And then, of course, right along, you've got no yards. There are no front yards. Right? Oh, goodness gracious. They got walls and everything. And I just thought, I asked the bishop, why didn't you built this road. Why did you make it so narrow?
Because
That's the way we do it. That's the way you make a road. No. Have you ever thought of making the road twice as wide? Oh, we wouldn't get as many houses in.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, but you'd be able to drive around without running over dogs and banging into children and,
Thumping each other.
be able to do it. But this is the way it is. They got a way to do it. I watched them build houses. I watch them build buildings, and every single time I see a building go up, they're building it exactly the same way, in the exact same layouts. They very little variation. That's the way it is. So aside from palaces, the houses had a certain structure to them, and in cities they tended to manifest this structure but a little tighter. And we're going to look at how they go. All right. So you usually have a city with a wall around it, surrounded by villages, with houses, and some of those houses were like row houses, but they have a very specific structure. All right. In every city, they usually had a square, and you had the roads that rolled out like spokes from that center. Okay. You had 3-room houses and 4-room houses. All the roofs were flat, and they were used. So if you were in a city, you might bring your, if you're a rich man and you own a hill that's catching the wind, you're going to bring your wheat up there. You're going to thresh it, you're going to thresh it, and you're going to throw it up in the air, and you're going to beat it, and you're going to throw it up in the air, and to get the kernels, the wheat kernels fall to the ground. The wind catches the chaff and blows it away. Well, in the city, you're going to bring your stuff in, and you're going to do that on the roof of your house. All right. Most of the time, what you have is you walk into it, and you got a big square room, and then the back of the house is cut in half, and the top half of the back room is the hadar, the bedroom. The bottom half is storage. So your bedroom is not tall. Your bedroom is, so if I was in this room, the bedroom would start at the railing. The top would be the bedroom, the bottom would be storage.
So it'd be more like a loft.
Yeah, it's like a loft, but it's not even tall enough for you to stand in. You crawl into it. The hadar is where the husband and wife went to be husband and wife. Families would often sleep in the main room, all together, laying on the floor. Everybody sleeping in the same room. When husband and wife wanted to be husband and wife, they had their space to go do it. Right. They would often sleep with the children all around them. I was just thinking of a very funny story of a man who escaped Russia. And they were in the city, and they would make him, if they wanted to be romantic, there was no time or place, so they would make him stand at the window and just don't turn around, just look out the window. And then they would,
Shook a while.
Yep, take a little while. And then he said, one day I'm standing there and I just staring out the window, and his father says to him, so what do you see? Oh, the neighbor's making love. How do you know? Because Tommy is looking at me. He's like, to have my own bedroom in America.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. All right, so you get the idea. You walk in, big square room. Back room, split in halfway. Top part is a loft bedroom that you crawl into, very low. Bottom part, all storage. And then you had the main area.
Okay,
Yes.
and what were they made out of? Thick,
Usually
blocks?
mud, sticks, bricks.
so it was soundproof like.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sure the walls
Oh,
were thick to
yeah.
keep
Mud,
it cool inside,
bricks
too.
made of cooked mud bricks and stuff like that. Some stone, very expensive ones can be stone, but mud thick, yeah, very soundproof. Yeah.
Yeah, and just keep it cool.
Yeah.
Now, then so you have that main room, back part, top is the hadar, bottom is storage, main room with the family, fireplace, right? Then you have a courtyard. And in the courtyard, you have the place for cooking. Right? That's where the women do the cooking, is in the courtyard. That's where the animals are. So when the guy comes and makes the vow, oh Lord, the first one thing that comes out the door of my house to greet me, expecting it to be a chicken or a pig or something, that's where the animals stayed. They stayed in the courtyard.
Sure.
All right. Servants would probably have been sleeping up on the roof, or they maybe had another area where they would have kept them, but they would have been out of the way, not with the women. All right. So that's the scene. So the men are in the house, drinking. They're probably going to sleep on the floor there, in the main floor, right? But the man is not bringing his wife in there while he's got a male guest. The women are going to stay in the courtyard, and that's where they're going to sleep. And they are accustomed to sleeping, just laying on the ground. You got a mat, you got a blanket, you lay down, you go to sleep. You know, we're so much better. You know, we got
Sort of perfect.
the Serta tension sleeper. So here's the house. See them up on the roof of the house? Now that is a thatched house. A good portion of them, you could still go up there. In India, they were stone, but you still would go up there. The children would sleep up in the roofs at night to catch the wind during the hot summer. In the winter, you wouldn't be up there because it'd be too cold. In the winter, if the women were forced to sleep outside, you maybe sleep down near the animals and get a little heat. Now, in some of the places, like in Bethlehem, that little courtyard area, there was the courtyard area, but you'd also have the cave under the house and put the animals under there, and the body heat of the animals would actually waft up through the house to warm the house. But this is pretty standard, pretty typical. The men are inside that square dwelling. The husband comes out to the outside door here, where he's talking to the men. The women are in the courtyard there. That's where they do their cooking. That's where they do their working. That's where they spend a good portion of their day. They're not cooped up inside the house. They're out there in the area. They get the animals, and they get the sun, and they've got, I'm sure they set up little things to have shade. And they, in India, I used to love it because we'd go and all the women would come together, and they'd all have big bowls in front of them, and they'd be shucking peas, and they'd be doing stuff, and they'd be preparing food for the next couple of days, and they'd all be doing it together, and I thought it was really nice.
So this is the door that he threw her out of.
That is likely the door he threw her out of. She has pointed to the first entrance into the courtyard from the outside street. Now imagine that layout, side by side by side by side by side in the city. It still's not going to change, but it's going to be the same. But it's going to be the same layout, but it's just going to be end to end to end to end to end. That courtyard is a very important place for the work. All right, so here's an elaborate one. Still the courtyard. It's got the portico over here where the women could actually get the shade off their head. And I'm sure in that other house they had cloth tied to sticks that were set up like a little tent over them to keep the sun off their heads.
Shade sail.
Right. You have the flat roofs, the stairs to go up there. Here's the much stronger roof for doing certain kinds of work. But again, imagine the man's in that house and comes out to that door. He's hearing nothing. Nothing. All right. So we had the door, the bedroom, right? Good for that. You had the living room, which was for the family. That's where the family would sleep, right? So remember the guy that comes knocking on the door. Hey! I've got a traveler that's come to my house from a long way. I have no bread. Wake up and get me some bread. Come on, dude. My children are in bed. What? It's because they're literally all laying there sleeping together. They're all in the same room, laying on the floor together, going to sleep. If he gets up to answer the door, he's got to literally crawl over all the bodies, right? The courtyard held the animals. It was the place of outdoor work for the women, cooking for part of the year if it wasn't raining. All right. Working and sleeping were done on the flat. Some work and sleeping were done on flat roofs, but the women would have stayed out there. Whatever is happening is that if the servants were on the roof, the women would not be. The women would be in the courtyard. It appears by the scenario here that the man wakes up in the morning from his house. From in the man's house. He was drinking. He's drunk. He's in a fairly sound, tight space. The owner comes out to the outside door of the courtyard. He's wrangling with them. The women are out here doing what the women do, hanging out, talking. He grabs the concubine and throws her out. Now, it doesn't mention that the host had a wife. That she's not part of the story. I don't imagine she would have been in there with him. She would have, if she was, but it seems like maybe he doesn't. His wife has passed, and what he has left is his daughter. And he offers to give her up. All right, so we see that. Think of the temple. This is the structure of the temple. Courtyard, holy place, holy of holies. Courtyard. Then you go into the living area, holy place. Then you go into the hadar, the holy of holies. Our bedroom with my house growing up, not when I was a kid, but when I was raising my own children, they were not allowed to come to pass the door of my bedroom without special permission, even if the door was open.
Mm-hmm.
You knock, no matter what. If the door is open, you knock. If the door is closed, you knock. You never come into our room. It is the sanctuary. I used to say, this is the sanctuary door. This is the Holy of Holies.
Mm-hmm.
You don't come in here without permission.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Ever. It's because when I was a child, I failed to knock on my parents' bedroom door once.
Traumatized.
And spend the
huh?
rest of my life in therapy. Oh, it marked me badly. All right. So with this picture in mind, so let's imagine the scene again. The host and guest are drinking in the living room. The women are in the courtyard. The servants have dropped out of the story, so don't know what's happened to them. Perhaps on the roof. The men beat on the courtyard door. The host goes out to them. The host offers his daughter and the guest concubine. They won't listen. So the host grabs the guest concubine and tosses her out. The guest wakes up in the next morning, having drunk himself into oblivion, and comes out and finds his wife sleeping in the courtyard, which is exactly where she's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
He might have thought a little odd that she's laying there with her hands on the threshold. But we have to have a question. Which door is she at? Which threshold is she grabbing? We're not 100% sure. What direction is she dying? It seems like she's trying to crawl for help. That maybe she's made it across the courtyard to the main house, and then he comes out and she's laying there.
Mm-hmm.
What's her condition? What's she look like? If she's asleep, she's got all this hair. Maybe he can't see her face. And I'm sure she's battered and bruised, and they've literally raped her to death. So she's obviously, but when he first comes out, is he looking down callously upon this beaten and abused woman? Or does he think that this is simply where she spent the night sleeping? A little odd, maybe. I don't know. I know it's hard for us to get our heads around it.
Mm-hmm.
So women did not sleep in the courtyard. Nobody slept in the
No,
courtyard.
you might if you have guests in the house. You have men in the house. They would not have put the men and women together.
Okay, so there could have been women in the courtyard when she was trying to get to the door.
Yeah, well, we know that we have a daughter that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. At least a daughter that's out
Yeah.
there. That's at least part of the story. So the women would have slept separate from the men. And if the weather is decent, they would sleep in the courtyard. But when you have a guest, the women are not going to be in there.
Okay.
The men, you're going to separate your men. They were very careful about who came in contact with their women.
So they would have known about this concubine then, that she was dead.
They,
The women that were in the courtyard.
perhaps, depending. We're not told what the daughter did. We know that there's a daughter there. We're not told what she did. Did she hide? Did she listen to the screams and the kerfuffle? Did she fall asleep? Did the woman come in? Because they said till morning. And so this is a long time. Is everyone asleep and she literally just crawls back into the courtyard? Did she die in the street? That would be weird. If he came out and found her in the street with her hands on the threshold to the courtyard, that would be odd. It seems like she's possibly made it across the courtyard and has died with her hands on the threshold of the man's house. Hard to say. They're not giving us enough details. I promise you the original readers had the scene down pat.
Oh, sure.
The original reader. Yeah, they knew exactly how this was going to go. So he says, wake up, let's get going. Does he think she's simply there sleeping?
Mm-hmm. From the sounds of it.
Perhaps. And I think it's a good thing. I don't think he's the one who did this.
Mm-mm.
I think he's ignorant of what has happened to his woman.
Yeah, he's
Because
kind
he's
of a dummy.
pretty angry
Mhm.
when he finds out what's happened. He's angry enough to do what he did, which we're going to talk about in a second. Let's get to it. Does the threshold matter? Bye-bye. Yeah, which threshold? We're not sure. Now, the threshold shows up 32 times in Scripture. It's both a legal and religious significance. It's the beginning of one's domain. It's the beginning of one's legal house. It's also considered a space between the realms. It's the place of beginnings and endings. That's why the god of doorways, Janus, has two heads. One faces forward, one faces back.
Mhm.
So it's pretty important to them, this idea of the threshold. Can you think of an important biblical story where the threshold is specifically mentioned?
Yeah, Passover.
Yes, okay. What about the story of Samuel?
Oh,
In
yes.
Samuel, not Samson.
Samson.
That's Samson. I'm talking about when in the book
Oh.
of Samuel, chapter 5, they capture the Ark of the Covenant,
Mhm.
and they come in and they find Dagon on his face before the Ark.
Mm.
They stand him back up. The next morning they find him, his hands and head cut off, and they are set on the threshold. Why there? Because it's the symbol of the beginning of his domain. It's a very important thing. When I cross this threshold, I enter a different space, a different legal space, a different sacred space. I'm going into a temple. When I cross the threshold of that temple, I'm in the domain of Dagon. I'm in the domain of Yahweh. And then Dagon cannot protect himself even in his own domain. The symbol is very important. All right, so I think it's important. I think it's the final symbol of failed hospitality rights. That's why I think it's her abuse as a guest in this man's house, with her hands on his threshold, is a symbol of the failed hospitality. It's the end of a long chain of events that were not right. None of this has gone the way it's supposed to go. Everything here is backward and twisted. It's awful. I think it's a powerful symbol, a powerful condemnation of the man and of the man's house, almost a curse against the man's house, that she, from the abuse that he openly subjected her to as a guest in his house, who had eaten from his table, dies with her hands gripping the threshold of his house. I think it's powerful symbolism. It's meaning for the husband. Go on, you're going to say something.
So when did he realize she was dead?
I think he realizes she's dead when she doesn't respond to his nudges and won't get up. This is the woman he loves. If he is not the one who threw her out, this is the greatest shock of his life. The story does not even. He probably wailed. He probably tore his garments, pulled his hair out, threw dust on his head, trilled into the heavens, let his grief out like a roaring, wounded water buffalo. If, however, he was the drunk and threw her out and doesn't remember it, or that's really the kind of heart that he had for her, then the coldness of the scene would make, I think what we're looking at, because he is enraged. He is so enraged that this has happened. Is this really the action of a man who threw her to the crowd to protect himself?
No.
Because he's going to cut her up, and that's a very powerful symbol, by the way.
What's missing, too, for me, is what happened to that host.
Yeah. He's probably going to die with the rest of them, but we never find out. But this host and those people in those streets and this behavior has started a chain of events that is going to lead to the decimation of the tribe of Benjamin. So again, we're looking at the house. Are her hands on that threshold? Are her hands on that threshold? I believe that as I read the story, she has crawled across the courtyard and has died laying here or here, asleep. Maybe here. But maybe she rolled around a little bit. I remember one time we went camping in the woods and we pitched our tent on a hill that was really a flat spot, but it was a little tilted. I mean, we're talking like, and we all woke up on one side of the tent, on top of one another. In our sleeping bags, we literally slid and rolled all in one big heap when we woke up. Those are the days when I could sleep through anything. Now, if my cat comes in the room and goes, meow, All right, so the last paragraph represents, we're almost done, a twisted version of a typical rallying cry for vengeance and justice. The typical thing would be, so let's read it, 1 Samuel 11:7. He took a yoke of oxen, cut them in pieces, and sent them through all the territory of Israel by the hand of messengers, saying, whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to this oxen. So shall it be done to his oxen. Then the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. So you get the imagery is here. If you do not respond to bring justice to this situation, this will be
your punishment.
Your oxen. Yeah, your punishment. But of course, now this isn't an oxen that's sent. It's a human being.
Oof.
All right. This is a letter about a failed rallying cry about the same situation. For 5 full days I have waited for the Hananeans, but the people do not assemble. A criminal in jail should be killed, beheaded, and his body carried around throughout the area between the villages to cause the people to be fearful and assemble quickly, because it is a curse. As I believe that her dying with her hands on the threshold is a curse against his house, cutting up her body and sending it to the people is a curse against them if they do not come and bring justice to this situation. Now, we are going to find out about what happens to the man a little bit, and that is that they refuse to give him up. They refuse to hand over the men who have done this. The rest of the tribe of Benjamin stands with this city, and this city stands with that man, and the city stands with those men who did this. All right. And when he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. So she sent with a messenger with an arm, a messenger with a leg, a messenger with a head, going to each city. Respond. This situation, this is what happened. You need to rally. You need to come together. And they sent throughout all the territory of Israel, and all who saw it said, such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak. You must respond, because this is a curse against them. If you don't bring justice to this situation, this will be you. And if man can't do it, may God in heaven do it. That's what this is, to do this. It's very so. In the next chapter, when the Benjaminites refuse to answer the cry against the Benjamite city, they are nearly exterminated by the rest of the tribes. So the Benjamites will not rally against this city. Had the Benjamites rallied against this city and said, even though this is a city within Benjamin, what is done here is terrible. We're going to bring justice to it. They won't. Then they would be fine. Just like if Achan's sons or wife had gone to the people of Israel and said, I break covenant with this man, I break faith with this man, I separate myself from that house, I am the Lord's, and let his sin be on his own head, they would have saved themselves. But they didn't. Rahab saved herself by breaking faith with the people of Jericho. Of course, rallying as many of them as she could, most likely into her house, that they might be saved. So the same thing. Benjamin will not respond. Thus, Benjamin's got to go too. Because that's the nature of the curse. Right? This is what's going to happen to you. So it's this is a story of devastating corruption in Israel. Right? In the face of a weak system of rule, Sodom is used to portray the depth of this depravity, reaching its climax in failed hospitality rights, homosexuality, and murderous rape against travelers. But this is worse. They are worse than Sodom, right? All right, so maybe a person is not convinced that it's not the husband. I'm not convinced. I mean, I am convinced that it's not the husband. I don't believe 1 second it's the husband. I think the layout of the situation leaves us a very reasonable position in which these events took place without the husband's knowledge. He's in a house that is largely soundproof. He is drunk. He is listening to things that are taking place outside the house. Maybe the daughter came, Dad, there are men at the gate. Like with Lot, the man offers his daughter but doesn't actually intend to give her. That's good. But he does break guest host's faith by grabbing the man's concubine and throwing her out. I don't believe that the husband comes out and knows that she has been hurt, knows what has happened to her. I think he has slept the sleep of the dead and has come out probably very hungover, and he's given her a little nudge because she's just laying there asleep. Who knows why women do the things they do? You know? Well, he's like, all right. But I think it's very reasonable to assume, especially in his physical condition, that he hasn't gotten his head around what's happened. He finds her dead, probably wailed and wept and cried over her, carried her away, came to understand. Maybe the man said what had happened, probably told some lie about it, but we've gotten the story, how it came out.
I found her like that.
Well, we can see this story is about the depth of depravity that a people can reach. You thought Sodom was bad? Here are the people of God. I had in India, they have I'm sorry to tell the story, but I'm going to tell it, just give us a sense of, there are things that happen among the pagans that you say, well, they're pagans. They're in darkness. But when it happens among the people who have Torah, have the scripture, have the word of God. So one of my students from India, he gets married, and he had a bit of an immoral past when he was a Hindu, but he's become a Christian. He gets married to a woman who, when she was a teenager, ran away with her boyfriend, and her father came and got her after one weekend. But they'd been together over that weekend, so her reputation in the community was ruined. Nobody would ever marry her. But this man loved her, cared for her, forgave her immoral past, because in Christ he was like, I had an immoral past. He even asked me about it. This woman, I want to marry her. But my mother is concerned because she had this bad reputation, but she's a Christian now, and she's been, it was only this one weekend, and I said, can you forgive it and live without jealousy? And he said, yeah, I can forgive it and live without jealousy. He goes, I have nothing to complain about given my life. What am I going to say? And this is a very interesting attitude, considering that most of the time in India, the men hold the women to a different standard than they hold themselves. But so they get married, and then he calls me one day, and he says, all right, let's give it context. They have what I call the alley-oop in India, where they view you as a guru, and they will throw a question at you to give you a chance to wax wonderful. Give you a chance to say something quotable. I need quotable quotes. Give them to me. Okay, so they'll give you an alley-oop. So he says, my wife and I have been going to a church, and we found out that the church is a wife swap, Christian church, but they wife swap. What do you think of this? Is it wrong for us to participate?
Oh, boom.
And I go, are you just throwing up a lob for me to knock out of the park? Or is this a real question? Are you honestly confused about what the scripture says on this? No, I'm honestly confused. And I write, have you been participating? Yes, we have. You have given your wife into the arms of other men? Your beautiful wife? Yes, I have. And you have gone to share the bed of other wives of the men in the church? Yes, I have. Oh, and boy, did I have something to say to him.
Oh, I'll bet. Wait.
You come and you tell me that before you were a Hindu, when you were a Hindu, you were immoral, and I say, well, yes, Hindus are immoral. You tell me now that you're a born-again Christian and you are behaving in ways that even non-Christians would consider, even most Hindus would consider horrible. Most Hindus would spit on you in contempt for the low morals that you're now manifesting as a person of Jesus Christ, and you don't know what you should think about it, and you don't know that you should be ashamed, that you have polluted your marriage, you have denigrated your wife. I was like, right now, you need to quit your job. You need to take your wife. You need to go back to Pune. You need to submit yourself to the leaders in Pune. And you need to seek restoration in the Lord. And you need to spend some time with them until you learn what it means to be a Christian man and a Christian husband. This is shameful beyond anything I can even imagine, that this should be named among Christians. The scriptures are obvious on this particular point. How could you not know? How could you act like you're confused on this particular point? And then I began to quote the Apostle Paul in Corinthians. And these things not be named among Christians. You have one in your midst that even with the pagans. So this is the element of this story. That to cast off the word of God, throw off the Torah in your heart, opens you to such depravity that these people who have Torah, have the light of God, have the path of life laid out before them, have reached a level of depravity that even the worst of the pagans would hardly even recognize. This kind of disgusting breaking of guest host relationships. So that's the context you put the story in.
If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below, and don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can, and tell your friends to watch. Thank you.